Welcome back to the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Coates. Join me along with industry leaders and friends on a quest to get more people through the gym door and eating and living healthier. Join me where evidence meets empathy while rejecting fitness industry fads and extremism. Let's begin. All right, I'm excited about this one. Dr. Alyssa Olenick, PhD of exercise physiology with time in academia, your own exploding successful, business, which we were just talking about off air, your fitness brand. Welcome to the show. I'm grateful to finally have you. Long overdue. Welcome.
I know. This is a long time coming, but I hold my promises. I do eventually get on people's podcasts when I say I'll do it. It just takes me a while.
Well, even when we were talking about this, I actually encourage you to make a priority of going on Luca Hocevar's because I connected you up with Luca and Joel Jameson, and I thought that was much more high leverage and important at the time for you. So I actually want what's best for other people.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I've slowed down a little bit on podcasts in the second half of this year, but I'm picking back up with a few again. And it's good to have chats with people that I've been like kind of sitting on getting them out the door.
And it's perfect timing too, because I think you're just an exploding authority on some really important things that are more and more in the public conscious. I want to definitely talk about zone 2 cardio, hybrid training, that sort of stuff. And because now I've really re-geared the podcast to speak to more of a general audience. I hope the coaches tagging along are going to love this. They're going to love you. They don't already know who you are. They should. Go follow Alyssa, please. Doc Liss. We'll talk about that after. But first, zone 2 cardio. Everybody's talking about it now. What the hell's going on?
Yeah. So, I give the disclaimer here since we're talking to Gen Pop is that zone 2 is awesome. And I think that it's a warranted discussion and things to talk about. But I think that it's now spilled over into this thing where people are thinking that it's the end all be all. If they can't do it or they're not doing it correctly, like they're going to lose fitness or they're a failure or all of these things. And so let's kind of talk about this in context of why it's relevant to regular people or where maybe it's putting the cart before the horse, so to speak, for a lot of these things. So zone 2 is essentially just describing a relative intensity of cardiovascular or aerobic exercise. It doesn't apply to resistance training. Your zones don't matter for resistance training, and it's not really even applicable to like your mixed mode, like your group fitness classes or CrossFit. It's more like a tried and true, like steady state, continuous single mode exercise. So running, I'll say incline walking because if I don't say walking, everyone's going to be like, oh, what about walking kind of thing. Cycling, rowing, swimming, just like steady state, continuous classic cardio, or as we called it back in the day, LISS, which is not code for my name, LISS, but low intensity steady state. So it's typically referencing like 60 to 70% of your max heart rate. And that's not concrete and true for everyone. But for a lot of Gen Pop regular people, this is where they don't like this advice. It's probably actually more true for you. So your zone 2, it's not just a intensity based off heart rate or max heart rate, but it's an intensity that's related to some of the underlying physiology that's happening to your body when you're doing cardio. So when you are doing cardiovascular training, you have something at the high end of your maximal aerobic capacity. You can think of this as like your cardio 1 rep max, and it's your VO2 max. So it's the maximal amount of oxygen your body can consume or use or metabolize or turn into energy to keep you moving forward or in general in exercise. So it's like your 1 rep max of cardiovascular training. But between being like fully sedentary and working up to your VO2 max, or even potentially beyond that, technically you can go super VO2, but that's a conversation for another day. Basically from baseline to your maximal cardio intensity that you could hold or sustain or achieve, you have these segments of stages, and something that happens is something called your ventilatory thresholds and your lactate thresholds. So you have these stages where your breathing starts to increase. And so that's driven by you breathe in oxygen and you breathe out CO2. And so when you're breathing out in and out during exercise, this is largely driven by your body detecting like the CO2 in your blood and sensing that to increase respiration. So you're breathing that out because it doesn't want it in there. And you can drive then to breathe more oxygen in. So you have this little pickup at the end of your zone 2. So you have zone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. At the end of your zone 2, you start to have this little pickup in your breathing and your respiration. Your body's starting to metabolize more energy. And because it's using more energy, it's producing more CO2, and it's starting to shift from a little bit more fat to a little bit more carb metabolism because it's not able to just only use fat and oxygen to drive and deliver everything it needs. Here also, at this point, right into your zone 2, you also start to have a slight increase in your blood lactate. And so blood lactate is always being produced. It's not something that lactic acid, as people like to call it, it's always being produced. It's not something that only happens during exercise. It goes away. You could think of it as like it's a metabolite, which it means nothing to Gen Pop people, but like when you break down carbs during exercise metabolism, you make lactates, basically is a way of thinking of it. So you can think of it as like a second tier version of a carb substrate, and your body uses this as a way to preserve your exercise intensity for longer and makes it like a less, it's like buffering or less acidic type of environment is the best way to put that. It makes it so that burning hard feeling actually gets delayed, but eventually your lactates will accumulate beyond what you can clear them out. But otherwise, at this point, you're starting to accumulate more of these and you're using them for energy, or breaking them down or clearing them out, if you want to think of it like that. But it's not so much so that it's super intense and super rapid. It's just starting to be a little bit higher. So the rate of production is greater than that rate of clearance here, but it's not so high that it's rapidly building. Then that is the end of your zone 2. Then you have your zone 3, and at the end of your zone 3 into your zone 4 and then 5, you have the second ventilatory threshold where you really start to breathe really hard, and then your lactate threshold where your lactate starts to increase rapidly, way faster than your body can keep up with the clearance. And so those are like the physiological bookends of that kind of zone 3. Really, you can think of it as like zone 3 is separating these two areas, but zone 2 is below that increase in respiration, or where you start to basically accumulate slightly more lactate, but still in a recoverable way. And so that part between zone 2 and zone 3, or the end of your zone 2, is dictated by your cardiovascular fitness status or your aerobic fitness status. And so this is why I say it's variable person to person, because the more fit you are, further up that is. So someone who's really, really fit, the heart rate of which their zone 2 is might be higher than 60 to 70% of their heart rate max. It might be something like 75 or 80, like really elite marathoners, because you're able to use oxygen more efficiently. You're able to use carbs and fats efficiently for fuel, and you're not having an accumulation of lactate, and your body can just sustain relatively higher intensities or higher efforts with it being lower effort on the body, so to speak. And so that's a long way of saying your zone 2 is roughly 60 to 70%, but as you get fitter, or if someone's fitter, it can expand and increase and go upward.
What are some easy markers for someone to know that they're in zone 2? And you pretty much already alluded to it. It's not a disaster if you're like dancing on the edges or slightly off. Like, what are some easy ways for someone to tell, hey, I'm in zone 2?
Yeah. So one, everyone rags on heart rate. It's not perfect. You're using a heart rate monitor that's wrist-based. It's not going to be as accurate as chest rate strap-based, but it's a good place to start. And for most average regular people, 60 to 70% is probably a good place to start. The issue is that for many of you, that's really hard to sustain for some types of activities. So like that heart rate is a great measure. I think a lot of people are like, heart rate's useless because it's too variable. Well, it is still an indirect measure of what's going on physiologically. It's not perfect, but it is good. So heart rate is one of them. But 2, if you're a regular person starting to do cardio, do not become dogmatic about what your heart rate says, because the cardio that you're doing is better than the cardio that you weren't doing. And if it's not zone 2, it's not perfect, like it's probably okay. That or the talk test. So because respiration starts to increase, the talk test is a really easy way to say, hey, am I in zone 2? And a lot of people still try to cheat this out. And a great way I like to say is like, could you be like, if your mom or brother or spouse or friend or whatever called you and you're on a run or a power walk or you're doing a cardio session or whatever you're doing, could you hold a conversation with them, right? Sometimes on my runs, I will straight up have a conversation with one of my family members, and sometimes they don't even know that I'm running, right? And so for you, you might be like, you freak of nature. And I'm not even like the fastest runner, but I'm a queen of zone 2 running, I'll tell you that much. But the idea is that you could hold like a conversation without really having it where you have to like gasp or take in a lot of breaths to make up for that. It's essentially you kind of feel like the oxygen coming in and the oxygen coming out are kind of like equal with each other. So can you hold a conversation with somebody in a sustainable way? That's the easiest way to do that. That just the talk test right there. That's a great way, because once that respiration starts to increase, you're probably tinkering on the line or spilling into zone 3 a little bit there as well. I will say though, for regular people, if you were doing less than 150 minutes of cardiovascular training per week, it probably doesn't matter what zone you're doing it in. That's the exercise guidelines, splitting that up across days, whether that's walking for you or you need higher intensity stuff or you're doing other things. Like if you're doing less than the exercise guidelines, it's not to say zone 2 isn't good for you or it can't be part of that training that you're doing, but getting to that guideline or above probably matters more than like the specific zone that you're in. Or if you are previously sedentary or you haven't done a lot of cardio and you find zone 2 to be really hard and impossible, like that's not a fatal flaw of you as a person. That's just because you haven't physiologically adapted to it. So you might have to do things like incline walking or slightly faster walking or cycling or rowing or the ski erg or whatever it is, that things are a little bit lower impact, lower intensity, where you can kind of control your effort a little bit more to keep your heart rate locked into that zone, where sometimes higher intensity stuff is harder for regulating that. Running is where I see people have this issue the most, is it's really hard to do. But your ability to stay in zone 2 is partially an adaptation to being cardiovascularly trained, because that window of staying in it is going to be smaller if you're less fit and larger if you're more fit, so to speak. And so I say that as a caveat of like, zone 2 is great, do it. But if you have a hard time with it, being perfect in it is the thing that's holding you back from doing cardio. Like, get to the exercise guidelines, then you can refine from there. Like, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good here. Zone 2 is good for you, and that's a great place to start. Honestly, like, if you have poor aerobic fitness, just lower intensity, steady state cardio is a great place to just start as an entryway. But your heart rate will probably be higher, even if it is lower intensity to you, or it might feel harder. And like, that's okay. Like, get in and get started and start adapting. And then you can refine from there, because it's going to be really hard to come off cold of not either being like, not doing cardio at all or barely doing any formal cardio. Like, give yourself some time to just get used to that. But that's like my disclaimer spiel of like, regular people listening to this. I think there's a lot of great stuff out there in zone 2, but so many people are like, I'm going to die, or I'm going to lose fitness, or I'm never going to, my mitochondria will never adapt if I'm not doing perfect zone 2. And yes, it's a good thing and it's important, but it's also like not like, it's not more important than just doing the cardio itself. And I'll give you the link, Andrew, you can put in the show notes or whatever. I have a zones calculator that you guys can use that's free, that will help you kind of estimate these based off your, it's going to be better if you use your true heart rate max. Age predicted heart rate max is like 220 minus your age, but the standard deviation on that, or error of that, is like 10 beats above and below. So it could be really off. So finding your true heart rate max, or, you can use heart rate reserve. I find that that's a little bit more accurate for people who are slightly fit that haven't done a threshold test. But if you're less fit, sometimes that might artificially still inflate it, but like, that's fine. If you're doing an artificially inflated zone 2, so be it. Just, it doesn't, because you need to be doing the cardio anyway. I like using threshold test with people who do really care about this. Like, let's see your 60-minute all out effort, but those are really hard, sucky tests to do. For regular people, I would just start with heart rate max or heart rate reserve and go from there.
There's a few things now. I'm going to jumble some stuff together. I think they're all sort of related, and I'll let you go wherever.
Yeah.
Like, you mentioned VO2 max. Okay. So first part is, we definitely hear a lot about VO2 max and longevity, but training VO2 max directly, probably really hard. Is it even practical? So that's first part. Second, the duration of your zone 2 cardio. We sometimes hear that, it needs to be 30 to even 40 minutes. Does that actually matter? And anything else to do with longevity about this stuff?
I'm writing these down so I don't forget them, because I'll go on tangents.
I got you anyway.
So, okay. So for when it comes to VO2 max training, people get obsessed with doing high intensity sprint or like HIIT training to train your VO2 max. And there is a component of that. Yes, that high end stuff will refine that, and that will drive your VO2 max, especially like in studies in short term, we see that. But you have to look long term. And one of the longest term things that's going to drive VO2 max, overall aerobic fitness, is going to be volume, right? We love talking about volume when it comes to lifting, but everyone's like, how can I do the least amount of volume cardio as possible and get the same adaptations? And there is still a huge, honestly, I think that you can cheat volume more with intensity with lifting than you can with cardio for like big, large scale benefits, right? Like, that's not to say volume in lifting doesn't matter, but I think you can like do less, but really high quality sets in lifting and get away with a little bit more than like, you could 1 or 2 HIIT sessions a week isn't going to do the same as like 5 hours of steady state cardio. Like, it's just not going to be the same replacement. So all that to say, you can do the high intensity sprint interval training stuff, but when we think about what increases VO2 max, yes, that does contribute to it, especially in the short term. Absolutely. Once you're adapted, you're eased into cardio, you're doing some training. I do think having at least one like quality session per week for the average person is probably all a lot of people even need, if it's like true HIIT for the most part, or sprint interval training, or some degree of like a small component of your training. But you're going to need easy continuous volume of training there too. So that also contributes to VO2 max. So yes, high intensity stuff that's like pushing that edge of that VO2 max, zone 4, zone 5 plus efforts is going to help push that forward. But we also, when we think about high intensity training versus easy training, they both work indirectly on the same pathways, right? Like they're both sending different signals through different cascades in our bodies to the same overall pathway that's driving these adaptations at our muscular level. And we're trying to increase mitochondrial number, mitochondrial density, mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, as you guys, they're essentially our little metabolic engines in our body. And so we want to increase the number or the efficiency of those. And that allows us to use more oxygen. And being able to use more oxygen then allows us to burn more fat or carbs for fuel, which allows us to do more total work or maintain higher work outputs, and or is what's actually making us fitter and increasing our VO2 max. I think too many people confuse cardio training with just heart adaptations, but it's not just a heart adaptation, it's a muscular adaptation. And so that's where a lot of those benefits are coming from, because that ability to use more oxygen is coming from the adaptation of, yes, you have to be able to pump out and deliver it from your heart and your lungs. But then there's also this component of once your blood's at your muscle, what is it able to take up that oxygen and use it? And that's what we need to improve. And so that's going to come from, yes, some high intensity training, but higher, moderate to higher volumes over a period of time, not just being super on and off with it, like being steady and consistent with it, of also like easy cardiovascular training across time. So VO2 max it is so heavily tied to long-term health outcomes for a lot of people. And even taking it from like very low to low can make a significant, I think for most of us, thinking of trying to at least be average with it would probably be better, because it does decline with age, just like we lose muscle with age. I don't think enough people talk about like having a high cardiovascular fitness and maintaining that with aging like we do with muscle, because that also plays a role in it too. So yeah, you really like all cardio training is going to improve your VO2 max more or less over time. Having some intensity in there, also volume of easy stuff. There's a genetic component here, but even with some training, you can increase your VO2 pretty significantly. Like a sedentary person can increase it by like 10 to 15% or, a lot. So, really thinking about like, let's do what we can to get it up. So in the short term, yes, high intensity stuff works, but in the long term in studies, like people tend to forget about like, that's where it just takes a lot. It's kind of like a slower effect there. So with that, yes. And so we think about like longevity and improving lifespan and health span, like you want to have as high of a cardiovascular fitness as you possibly can. I think Joel has this take a lot as like actually having a higher VO2 is probably more important than some of the strength and muscle and power metrics that people like really harp on. And it's not to say those things aren't important. I just think the fitness industry will often overinflate, having muscle or strength to a certain point. Past that is probably not, it's not like super compensating things, but we just have so much long-term like data on VO2 max and health and longevity and outcomes. And so I think it's like, it's not to go back to an either or. It's that I think so much of the fitness industry is now coming back to it, right? Like now I think there's this push on zone 2 and aerobic fitness, but like forgets how much this is tied to long-term health. And I would encourage people to not be obsessed with like increasing a metric of VO2. Most of you are never going to do a true VO max test. Your watches can be accurate within reason if you're dialing them in kind of correctly. But what I would focus on more instead is like find a fitness metric that you can improve. So whether that's a 1 mile run time or a 5K row or a 10K bike or whatever, like find something that you can just test at baseline and improve that. Improving your 5K running time itself, going to be a more measurable thing that you can actually, trainable and measurable thing. And if you improve your 5K time, guess what's probably also improving in the process of improving that 5K time. Just kind of like people say grip strength is really tied to longevity and health, but like training grip all day long isn't the thing that you need to be doing. Like it's just a metric of overall strength is what that's showing. Same thing with that. So don't become obsessive about like, oh, I need to like super lock in my VO2. Like run a faster 5K or even be able to do cardio sustain for 30 or 60 minutes, I think is like a really good baseline. Like being able to do continuous, it doesn't have to, I always default to running just because I'm a runner, but it doesn't have to be running, but some sort of default cardio for 30 to 60 minutes, I think is a really good goal for a lot of people to be able to sustain that as like a minimum. That's not backed by like some specific data, but I just think like that, I mean, the exercise guidelines, if you think about it, is like 30 minutes, 5 days a week. So being able at least to do 30 minutes of continuous cardio at a time is like probably a good thing to be able to do. And And so I think that that's like a good minimum guideline for people. Like, can you sustain 30 to 60 minutes of cardio training? That's at least 50 to 60% of your heart rate max or higher, right? Like usually you want at least 50%. I like saying, let's get to that 60 kind of thing. And then when it comes to the zone 2 training duration, you know, the thing about zone 2 that makes it work is that you could do a lot of it for a lot of volume with like low fatigue. And so when it comes to exercise, you have the caveat of there's never too little that you can do. I think even ACSM changed it from like a minimum of 10 minutes to like even 1 minute counts at a time. But I would say like to make it worth it, I would say 20 minutes as like a minimum would be my kind of minimum there. I do think there's merit to doing it in that 30 to 90 minute range, I would say. I think for most people, you probably don't need to go, unless you're training for running events, you don't need to go over like 90 minutes of continuous steady state exercise. But I think having your sessions be at least 20 or 30 to 60 minutes is a good time range. I think it's like gonna be more ideal if you do like, so some people will be like, what if I did like 20 minutes before my lift and 20 minutes after my lift? And like, that's fine and that's okay, but it's probably gonna be better like if you did 40 minutes altogether, right? But like, that's also fine. It's about just getting it in. It's what's the goal for you to have with it, right? Kind of thing. Like, what's the point? So I like to say 20 as a minimum is probably like a good, like, I don't think we don't have like a study that's like, this is the minimum amount of zone 2 that you have to do kind of thing. But thinking about, dosing it out, I like that as a minimum, but I think 30 to 60 minutes is like a good target for that, for like the average regular person training, or even a lot of, people who are training for running events that are not super far distance. That's probably a good timeline for easy runs as well. So that's what I would suggest for people. And you could do it. It could be a few days a week of shorter, and it could be then one longer session on the weekend. That's very classic endurance training, like having a long run. You could have like a longer zone 2 session on the weekend and then sprinkle in whatever you can the rest of the week. But all of your training doesn't have to be zone 2. It can be a balance between zone 2 and higher intensity stuff. Or for a lot of regular people, the things that's getting them to do cardio or getting them to stay in the gym is stuff that's entertaining to them, makes it interesting. And zone 2 is really boring. And so finding ways to like make it entertaining to you. I just published a YouTube video, 3 ways to do zone 2, that shows like 3 different ways you can do it. And one of them is your classic tried and true. But there's ways that you can make it variable and interesting. I know Luca talks about this a lot, and so does Jason, with like you have to make things fun and interesting to break these up. Because not everyone wants to go out and do a steady state zone 2. It's good for you to do, but it's okay if you want to mix it up or, sprinkle it into other types of way of training. But yeah, that's my spiel on the 3 things you asked about there. I got my checklist.
Love it. Something I talk fairly frequently about, I'll post on my social media, is I'll sit in a recumbent bike. And I know traditionally there's like people who like shit on recumbent bikes, but I'll sit and I'll read a book. I watch one of my best friends sitting upright in a spin bike. And I think on average women are a little more flexible than guys. So like sitting in that position doesn't feel very good, but I'll sit in a recumbent bike and I'm reading books, and I find that I want more time to do cardio. I want more time to read physical books, and you guys will get it. It's already recorded, but soon you'll get Jonathan Goodman's new episode. It's going to come out right as this new book, The Obvious Choice, comes out. I'm going to plug that. It's amazing. I'm reading an advanced copy right now. That's what I'm doing. And I'll go to the gym because if I sit in a bike, I'm bored immediately. I can't listen to podcasts on it. Music's not enough. I can't psychologically tolerate it, right? My attention span is terrible for that stuff. But if I'm reading a book, I also recently got myself a handheld video game thing that can play old Nintendo, Super Nintendo games. And time will pass pretty fast if you're on a bike like that. But I've also found that the right kind of treadmill, put the book in the console, crank up the incline, because I really like incline treadmill. And that works really well for me. So it lets me habit stacking, right? It lets me combine 2 things that I want to do more of. And that combo really works for me psychologically and experientially. Whereas just doing cardio alone, I just struggle with it.
Yeah. I mean, even I'm the endurance girl for a lot of people, but if you notice, I'm rarely doing indoor cardio because I absolutely hate it. If I have to use a treadmill, I despise it. But a lot of the times, if I'm doing like for training, for those of you who don't know me, I do trail and ultra marathons and hiking and all this outdoor stuff. But that's a lot of zone 2 training for me to do that. And so I will do a lot of YouTube videos when I'm doing my treadmill power hiking or run if I have to do that, or I'll do YouTube videos on the stair stepper, or like a lot of times I'll do Q&As on stair step days because it's like, it just allows me to pass the time while I'm like double or reply to DMs or whatever it is that I'm doing while I'm on it. Because it's not Sometimes on the Stairmaster, I can zone out for some reason. But yeah, I pop on YouTube videos when I'm doing it. And it's a great way for you to catch up on things. Like I like watching a lot of like documentaries. Like that's a great time to catch up on those because they're not like on your TV kind of thing. But yeah, you're not a bad person for being bored about it. Or like consider like, I think this is the thing too, is like for a lot of people, like your cardio can be enjoyable. Like go for a hike, go to a trail, go to somewhere novel, take your dog somewhere. Like it doesn't, or do a pickup sport or join a league or pickleball or whatever it is that you're doing. Like I think that, yeah, having a specific formal cardio approach is great if you want to be super specific about it. But if you don't, like, you have a lot more flexibility to kind of make it what you want it to be. It only needs to be like super specific if you're like looking for specific results or goals. Like it might pass a lot more time to go, you know, run up and down a park with your dog because you're playing fetch or doing a pickleball game than it might be to mill away on a treadmill or whatever that looks like to you.
Is there any issue with traditionally we've discarded the idea of the muscle confusion principle where we somehow need to confuse muscles? We know that's rubbish. More consistency within strength training is great, but I think there's still this belief that holds on that you need to have variability in your cardiovascular training, probably because they think, well, in order to burn fat more effectively. But I tend to look at burning calories as a distant third reason to do cardio. First and foremost, I tend to look at is for like cardiovascular health, longevity, heart health. Second, almost equal footing is performance, right? We are training cardiovascular capacity for a specific type of performance. You mentioned how you run, like you're ultra endurance athlete. So you actually have to have those adaptations. Someone like Joel, we mentioned Joel Jameson a couple of times. And I'm going to get Joel on at some point soon again to talk about longevity and the research he's been into as well. But Joel traditionally is known for training MMA athletes. So they have to have the conditioning to handle 3 or 5 rounds, depending on the nature of their fight, right? So is this idea that you need to mix up your cardio overblown?
Yeah, I mean, so yes and no. One, from a fat confusing perspective, no. And my entire dissertation and master's thesis were on fat metabolism. I just never talk about it because I don't want to become the fat loss girl because I'm the performance. I like talking about performance more, but improving your cardiovascular fitness, doing more volume or more of it or improving it over time will improve your body's ability to burn fat, quote unquote, more than trying to like use that for I just think it's a waste of time and energy to think about it that way. Cardio in general is expending more calories than like most things that you're doing in an acute sense, but it's not the reason to do it. And it's not as linear as people make it out to be. So yes, I agree with you there, but I'll give the disclaimer of like, if you are worried about your ability to burn fat, guess what? People with higher VO2 maxes are a lot better at using fat for fuel during exercise in response to what they're eating across the day. You're more metabolically flexible. You're metabolically capable. Like if you're worried about that, have a higher VO2 max or improve your cardiovascular fitness performance. But you don't need like this confusion for that. But I will say when it comes to, I'm going to kind of like butcher the quote. There's so many different ways or people that say this, but essentially like the key to like good cardio is to do as much easy stuff as you can, make some of it hard is really like the kind of, there's a 10 different ways people say it. And the hard stuff can be like, you can kind of mix up some of that. And there's merit to doing things at like moderate, high, and then very hard intensity paces and efforts. A lot of people will ask me is like hit or sprint interval training better. And I'm like, do a little bit of both, right? Like I give my clients 4 hit or sprint interval workouts a month in our app if they want to do that type of training. And I make it like, so some weeks they're sprinting, some weeks they're doing like the longer stuff because there's merit to doing longer versus shorter efforts and kind of doing it across that. So do a lot of easy stuff, make some of it hard. And that's where like, if you want to get the nuances, it's like if you're training for a running thing, you're going to do some tempo and some sprints and some short stuff. Like, yeah, there's that, but like, that's the easiest way to think about it for most people that really works is do a lot of stuff easy, make some of it hard. Don't worry about confusion or fat burning or calorie burning. Like that's kind of the ticket to success.
Agree. Love it. I'm really enjoying this because I think the way you're explaining a lot of these concepts has been amazing. I think this is just a masterclass and all this stuff. There's one thing you mentioned there, sprints, and here's a slightly separate concept, and it's just a quick one, but I think it's really important to just maintain specific types of movement quality. There's a quote been circulating about like how past 30 or 35, like most people, certain percentage of people never sprint again. And so I think like, hey, you want to retain that movement quality. As people get older, especially older adults, something I try to incorporate in the programs is have power and explosive movement. And it's not, I'm not an Olympic lifting coach. So it's not like there's any like snatches or power cleans going on there, but I've got like a 74-year-old client. She is lovely. We're working back from a knee replacement, and I have her hucking medicine balls at a wall, right? She likes that. And so it's appropriate load. Like this idea that this power explosive stuff's not safe. I mean, sure, you have to manage a load. You don't have like someone who's probably obese in their 70s who's never done this stuff before and having them doing depth jumps. And
You know, it's so funny. That's the first movement that popped into my head when you were thinking about things to not throw people into. I was going to say, yeah, that's so funny. That's the exact first thing that popped into my head.
But they want to actually learn how to do like jump stuff. I mean, you could find like load management appropriate ways to do these things. I mean, load management. Okay, here's another question. Then I want to go into hybrid training, but how important is load management progression for, mitigating injury risk when it comes to the cardio side of stuff?
Yeah. So one, I agree with you on the keeping power in your training, especially like I did a podcast interview this morning on menopause, peri and post menopause. Like especially women, as we age across the lifespan, like that declines a lot with age, but it's exacerbated by those things. But yeah, let's keep power, explosiveness, intensity, speed of things. And a lot of people stop training that. Whether you don't have to sprint, especially if you haven't been sprinting for 20 years, don't just go out and sprint. But can we put some sort of fast, rapid, fast twitchy type stuff in your training? I think everyone should have that all the time in some degree. So I totally agree with you there. And then for cardio, it's one of those things where like it does need to be gradually, progressively increased, but the lower the impact, the more you can probably get away with jumping into like doing a lot. Like if somebody goes from doing 0 minutes of cardio per week and they go to 3 hours of recumbent bike zone 2 work, they're probably going to be their legs might be fatigued and tired, or they might be more hungry, but they're probably not actually doing too much to overstress their body. Versus if you haven't been running at all, I would absolutely not recommend that you jump into we see this all the time with clients. They're like, oh, I could totally jump into this program that has way more mileage that I've been doing because I could do this. But then they get shin splints and they get injured. So it depends on like what you're doing. Of course, there's going to be some degree of potentially overuse. Like if you hopped on like a rower and we're doing high intensity intervals and start doing a lot of them, a lot more than you did, you'll probably start to feel maybe your knees or ankles feel like a little stressed or your back from pulling that much. But if you're keeping the intensity low and easing into the volume, I wouldn't worry about it too much. And also just think about the mode that you're doing. I think cycling is the most easy load reducing way to just jump into adding this in. But then for everything else, like if you're doing something that's more intense or more weight bearing, can just consider easing that in a little bit more. Like don't just go hop, even the stair stepper or hiking or power hiking or walking a lot for people. If you're not used to that, you might get a little sore and tired from doing those things. So don't maybe jump into like 5 hours a week of it right off the bat. I think where people get into issues when they're doing things that are like the running more so specifically, or the intensity, right? Like I know everyone talks about how great HIIT and sprint interval training is and the high intensity stuff, but if you're taking regular people who haven't been doing any formal cardio or have very poor aerobic fitness and you just toss them into high intensity work, it's gonna suck, it's gonna hurt, they're gonna hate it, or it's going to potentially be like not too hard on them and like you're immediately gonna like die right on the spot kind of way, but it might overstrain their muscles or their tendons and ligaments in ways that they haven't been adapted to yet at that period of time. So it's like, I always see that the industry is like, you should be sprinting, you should be doing HIIT, you should be doing sprint. I'm like, my brothers in Christ, you haven't done cardio other than incline walking for the last 6 years. Like you've got to like let your body adapt a little bit to these things. And so it's not to say you have to avoid intensity, but like I usually recommend people actually start with the dreaded zone 3, moderate intensity intervals or moderate intensity effort, and then working up towards threshold and then the higher intensity stuff. Let's get great exposure. But I think it was Steve Magnus made a great poster, something the other day of talking about, like intensity is a lot easier when you have the fitness to support it, right? Like if you just go right into intensity, like stop trying to gain fitness by just using intensity to gain fitness rather than gaining fitness to do intensity. And I really like that approach too. I usually take the approach with my clients of like volume than intensity when it comes to building anything with either cardio or even weight training or running or whatever it is. Like let's build our base and then refine it, make it more specific, make it more intense as you get from that. So again, it depends on the mode that you're doing. Running is the thing that I always give the biggest disclaimers on. If you just jump into a bunch of running, you're going to blow up. you're just going to blow up. But if you're on a bike, even an air bike, and you want to do a couple moderate hard intervals in an air bike, it's probably not going to like, it's probably going to be fine. That's probably an okay entry point versus like, let's all go do sprints. And if you're going to do sprints, do them on a hill, don't do them on flat ground, because the hill itself will reduce some of that and make it a little bit easier. That would be actually the first entry point to sprints I would give people, is like, do it on an incline if you can. That will make it a little bit easier. But yeah, like, it just mode specific. I think the air bike is probably the perfect happy medium here for a lot of these things. But yeah, don't just hop into 5K a day.
Nobody is going to do enough air bike to get them hurt. They will stop because
Yes.
the bike sucks before they get hurt. Love Steve Magnus. His books are great. Gotta give him a shout. Actually, it's funny. I have Brad Stolberg. So him and Brad Stolberg wrote a book together, Peak Performance, I think. And I have Brad's book, Master Change, right behind me. I love Steve's stuff. It's kind of funny. It's like social, weird little tangent, little pat on the back sort of thing. But like Steve Magnus, Brad Stolberg, Michael Easter, they all follow my Instagram. They're all great guys, write great books. And then I have like Julian, JP Tremblay, who's like Julian from the Trailer Park Boys, like comments on my stuff and follows. And I'm just like, I love this. There's the cross section
So
of
funny.
interesting people. Anyway, so
Yeah.
congratulatory little side tangent. Hybrid training. Lots of people talk about this. You talk about it tons.
You got the hybrid on your term sweatshirt on right now.
Love it. Okay, so what matters? We hear people talk about, and I will explicitly say, I think the interference effect is an overblown thing that most people don't need to worry about. Hey, how do you go about hybrid training? What is it? What matters?
Yeah, hybrid training is the now industry terminology, which is funny that it's now so trendy, because I've been like talking about this for years and it blew up. So nothing like being ahead of the trend, go me. But a lot of people rag on it because now it's popular and they're like, oh, that's just strength and conditioning. And you're like, yeah, it is to some degree. Strength and conditioning has always been around. Also, I like to say the hybrid training is the exercise guidelines in disguise. I think everybody should be doing hybrid training to some degree, but not everyone's hybrid training in a hybrid training way. So I like to say, I don't know if this video is published anywhere. If you're not, I think you're just listening to it remotely. My company slogan is hybrid on your terms, because I like to say, define what that means to you, because for most people, it doesn't matter if it's the specific definition of maximizing both at the same time. The idea is that you're doing a little bit of both in some way that aligns with your life, because health, longevity, wellness, metabolic health, whatever we care about is maximized with concurrent training. So concurrent training is the scientific word for including strength and endurance or conditioning or whatever it is, both in the same day, week, training cycle, or like program across time. How it's programmed will just depend. And so athletes for years have, yes, done concurrent training to some degree, right? Elite runners lift. They're not lifting as much as elite weightlifters, and elite weightlifters are doing some sort of conditioning or training. And then there's the middle ground of athletes who are doing a lot of both. And so this kind of comes from that side of the science world, where people are researching, well, how do we minimize or maximize this? Because athletes need some degree of both in their training, or it's complementary or whatever. So in the new sphere of fitness industry, hybrid is about maximizing two characteristics at the same time. So you want to run far and fast, or bike far and fast, or whatever it is that you're doing. Running kind of is the thing that everyone's kind of doing right now, while being as strong and ripped as possible simultaneously. But I like to say hybrid is on a spectrum. Hybrid, the middle is, yes, you are maximizing both those characteristics. You're trying to make the most of those at the same time, right? But not everyone has to be doing that. You can have it where I kind of call it the spectrum has the one end where it's like, I'm the bro lifter who will not do cardio. It's killing my gains. I'm only lifting. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have I'm the runner that won't lift a single weight because it will make me slow and make me fat or make me gain weight. And then you have the step in. And you have the runner who's doing a little bit of lifting, and then you have the lifter who's doing some cardio for health. And as long as that's the minimum, that's okay. That doesn't, you don't have to call yourself a hybrid athlete. You're just doing like health minimum guidelines, but like, then you can take it a step in and be like, hey, like I'm still mostly focused on lifting, but I want to have pretty good cardiovascular fitness there kind of thing. Versus, hey, like I'm running and I'm running like a lot, but I want to have pretty decently impressive strength, but you're still not trying to maximize both at the same time, so to speak. Versus the middle is like, hey, I want to be like the most best at both of these things that I can do. And I think that most regular people either fall to the right or the left, or they fall below it where they're like doing the most of what they can of both, but they're not maximizing it because we're regular people who don't have all of the time in the world. Our entire job is not just to train, because the reality is hybrid training favors the genetically gifted or those with a lot of free time, if I'm being honest, right? Like that's that's something that I think doesn't get talked enough about a lot in the hybrid training sphere, so to speak. Or people have spent time on one side of the spectrum and then go to the other side of the spectrum. And it's a lot easier to maintain the thing you have than it is to gain both at the same time. So there's some caveats here for people. I think everything is so trendy right now with hybrid, and people are like, why can't I maximize both? And I'm like, well, you've spent the past 20 years only lifting and never doing any cardio. Like, you're going to need a couple years to do some cardio to get better at it, like to that extent and that degree, right? So it kind of, you have to think about where I think with hybrid or concurrent training, it's about identifying the gaps of where you're lacking and maybe pulling back in one area to add that if you want to improve it, or just saying, hey, I don't care about maximizing this. I just want to add this in for what I need to do for health. So I like to think of it as a spectrum, and you can call it hybrid training, or you can just call it concurrent training, or you can just call it regular training. I think everybody should be doing some at least 2 days of resistance training per week, up to 30 minutes, and at least 150 minutes of cardiovascular or movement activity per week, because those are the exercise guidelines. And then anything above that, you can just kind of do whatever you want, but you should have at least some component of both in there. But when it comes to like actual true hybrid training, for those that are kind of, I would call the very middle or to the two sides of it, there's definitely interference going on there, but it's not coming from the interference of what people are thinking is like the molecular level interference. Yes, there are pathways that inhibit each other and turn each other off or on or whatever you want to call it. But the things that are going to limit this a lot more, one I alluded to earlier, time. Do you have enough time per week, right? Because hybrid training is a lot more endurance training than people realize it is, because it takes a lot of volume to be better or to be good at endurance, especially if you're trying to run. Like, it just, you really can't cheat that. And so I think a lot of people think hybrid training is like, I'm going to do equal lifting and running every day per week. And it's usually, if you really pay attention to these hybrid athletes out there, they were historically lifters or historically spent a long period of time getting strong and gaining muscle. So they are strong and have muscle. And then now they are doing a lot of conditioning. I don't think people pick up on this kind of thing. They're still lifting. They're still lifting hard and training hard. If they have 20, 30 hours a week to train, it probably looks like they're doing a lot of both to you. But it's so much volume of endurance training to be able to do these things that people are doing. And so there's that component of it, but also you're limited not only by your time, but the biggest things that are going to impact that interference that people are worried about is nutrition, sleep, and then just your current recoverable capacity. I like to talk about hybrid fitness as like having I call it like the bucket, like the bucket theory or the fishbowl theory, whatever it is. Like, you have like a bucket or a bowl and you only have so much water in it. And the fitter you are, the more water you have in this bowl or this bucket. And then you have the 2 cups or little buckets to the side, and one's for conditioning or cardio and one's for lifting. And the less fit you are, the less you have to give to each bucket. So you're kind of having to do less of both to either recover, or you can only maintain, versus like if you were to do all in one. So this is why it's easier for like that beginner person to feel like they can balance only lifting or only cardio, because it's hard to do both because you only have so much recoverability and fitness capacity that you can kind of give. But as you gain fitness, you kind of have more water to give to both. And the really fit people can do a lot, because intensity or volume or high volume training, I like to say, is earned, because people love to just do as much as they can all the time. And I have a lot of clients who are like, hey, we need to step it back. Maybe eventually you can work yourself back up to this, but you can't recover or handle all of this. Or sometimes it's, hey, I need to give more water to my cardio bucket because I've neglected it for years. So I'm going to have to pull back on the water in my lifting bucket over here. But then you get more fit and you can bring that back up on that lifting side again. So I like to call it seasons, or you're titrating it, or you're taking it in steps and raising like the ceiling and the floor of what you can handle, or having more water to give into your individual buckets of what you can handle over time. And so yeah, I know it's super trendy right now, but it's also like, you have to think of it, if anything, like hybrid training, it can just be regular, I'm Gen Pop doing both training, but if you really have specific goals with it, you need to be thinking about it as a long-term process. It's not just a 6-week challenge. It's like, hey, what do I need to get better at now or work on now so I'm better overall in a year? And that's hard for people to think about because they just want to be better at both at the same time, but it's sometimes taking it step by step.
I really like the idea of season. Like, I think if people can grab onto that, especially, that is going to be helpful. All right, let's touch on research on women in fitness. This is something that you and I have talked about it in person a little bit. I know you're kind of passionate about it. Very long time, a lot of the research on resistance training, all this sort of stuff in our world and beyond it has been heavily done in men. You've been involved yourself in some of the research on women. Is this catching up? Are we getting better understanding of things? I know there's way more talk about menopause right now. That's a kind of a really big one. And to the point where you have literal almost grifters and people of questionable integrity wandering into these spaces. You have, I won't say names, but there's a guy with a history of sexual predation and inappropriate behavior who is grifting on menopause. And all of a sudden he's a menopause guru. Like, holy shit. Anyway, so well, when it comes to the research stuff, is it getting better? Anything exciting?
I do think it's getting better. I think it's one of those things where sometimes we get too many people coming with pitchforks for a very slow process. Science is just slow. The things we want answers to yesterday are going to take studies, and well-done studies. They take years to do, and then they take more time to even publish and get out there. And so give grace. I do hate when people come for their like, oh, scientists and forests, and there's so many amazing researchers right now doing this work. It's just a slow process. I have so many peers or mentors or people I look up to that are doing amazing stuff. So I do think it's getting better. There's a push for it. There's a whole avenue of like NIH level funding here in the States that's pushing for more, like the Women's Health Initiative. There's some great people doing work that is on like the menstrual cycle and birth control stuff. It's just, again, it's a slow process. Me and my colleagues did publish a paper in 2021 doing a follow-up to a study that was done like 5 years prior, looking at the rates of publications in the top 5 sport and exercise science journals, and basically like how many of these studies were done exclusively on women versus how many included female versus male only participants. And we found essentially that it didn't improve. So over a 10-year period, it wasn't improving, but I would bet that that's going to improve in the next 5 to 10 years. I do think there's some positive stuff. Like one of the journals I submitted one of my dissertation papers to, like made you had to rationalize whether or not you included women in your study versus like my one friend just talked about recently that she was trying to get a study accepted and it was on resistance training in women. And the reviewer said one of the limitations was that they only included women, but like you would never see someone say one of the limitations is that you only include men. So there's pros and cons. And then from a research standpoint, you know, there's a big push for improved quality, but there's also this apprehension of like, if we're only pushing for improved quality, are we stopping people from doing this work that isn't perfect? So that's just like kind of a backdoor view of like what's kind of going on the backside of these things here for people to understand. But it is improving. It is getting better. We are getting more studies out. I think everyone's always going to complain that they're not done the way they want. There's not enough participants. It's not done perfectly, but it's not. Menopause is to some degree, but a lot of the other female phys stuff is just not very well funded because, you know, the NIH doesn't care about if your menstrual cycle is impacting your recoverability, right? The NIH cares if menopause is causing increased healthcare costs because of metabolic syndrome, right? Like that's just, at least in the States, that's the reality. Canada's funding is a little bit better, I think, for some general open-ended stuff, but they still have a lot of health focus there. If you're wanting good sports science, it's in Europe or like Australia. That's where there's a little bit more like, hey, we actually will fund some of these things. It just depends where you're looking, but it is getting better. We are learning more, or we're at least like, we're having more stuff come out that kind of reaffirms things that a lot of us are saying. Hint, it's not the cycle sinkers who are in the right. It's the scientists saying, it's not as sexy as you think it is, kind of thing. So that's where we're kind of with the state of the science, at least from my view.
Are there any things that are emerging where the data is showing up that, hey, women are actually a little more different than we thought? Because I think the most of the underlying messaging is that like, it's sort of this thing is like, women are not just smaller men, but at the same time, when it comes to most big things, you really don't need to train men and women differently from a physiological level. So is there anything there?
So I say yes and no. I have the caveat of like, women aren't small men, but women aren't another species. We're still humans and we respond to a lot of the same things. I think that where we see the biggest contrast is going to be like menopause, that loss of estrogen and change in sex hormones. It doesn't really make the prescription look that much different than what it is for men, but it's like, it's almost like increasingly more important there, like because of that. So it's not that it's that much different. It just becomes more important is the kind of thing. I think we'll see things potentially over the years that we'll talk about, like, you know, we see some stuff like women are better at using fat oxidation at lower steady state exercise intensities, but that doesn't, when it comes to performance, it doesn't matter because men still have more hemoglobin and bigger hearts. So like, even though we have that advantage, it doesn't actually necessarily help us in a net, like overall, you know, whole body level. So we see things like that. potentially needing, being able to handle more volume, higher volume sets because we're more oxidative. You might need less rest times because of that, but also that's a training characteristic. I think a lot of people, when they talk about women being more oxidative or type 1 muscle fiber twitched handling or all that stuff, but like a sedentary woman isn't going to have like this just default super high elevated level of aerobic capacity. It's still a trained characteristic. And I think that, I don't know, I would need more data to back this, but I have this underlying theory and hypothesis coming out of my dissertation work that low fitness status negatively impacts women more than men. Like a low aerobic fitness status. That's just my bias because of my dissertation data basically found low aerobic fitness status impacted metabolism during exercise or postprandially in women more. The sample size wasn't huge in one of the sub-analyses I did, but I think that there's potentially something there with that. But I would, we need more data and studies on that. But I think that might be something that's potential. But again, I can't say that that's like a hardcore truth. It's just like this underlying theory that I have that you need almost the trained characteristic to maximize the presence and benefit of estrogen when it comes to these adaptations and training. And there's little things like that, like potentially needing less rest times during like high intensity training because you can kind of recover a little bit quicker and, things like that. But I don't think like the overall things that we need are different. I think it's what happens is the ratios or prescriptions might be tweaked a little bit, but it's not like, oh, women should never do X, Y, or Z because we can't handle it or we can't do it. It's not that. It's going to be like, oh, let's modify volume or rest times or, increase the intensity percentage here or like things like that where we might see stuff. But I haven't seen anything at least that's so broad sweeping that it's like women are so different in this than men, other than like maybe manipulation of certain characteristics across time, whether that's during menopause or within menstrual cycles or whatever it is. Like, I think that's where we'll see that stuff. But yeah, nothing that stands out to me is like, oh my gosh, we're so different.
Anecdotally and traditionally, I think the belief that you alluded to this is I've certainly noticed that the women I've trained, and I've got like 14 years of full-time training now, so it's a fairly big data set, seem to recover quicker between sets, but I also find that women like to train that way. There may be something to this as well, as on average, and I love this sentence, on average, women are smaller than men. So therefore, they're going to be dealing with loads that are on average lighter loads, which causes less muscular disruption from an absolute standpoint and less nervous system disruption. So therefore, they may actually just be able to recover faster. We definitely anecdotally see that women can do more reps closer to their 1 rep max than men, but there's also two interpretations because also they drop off quicker as they close to the 1 rep max. It may have to do with the on average size muscularity of the difference between women and men. So it may not necessarily be that big effect, but I also think, and you alluded to this, is like, what do people self-select to want to do, right?
Yeah. And so there's little things there are sex differences in things like some of that being able to do a higher percent of your 1 rep max in women is a noted observation that we see, but it also might be due to the fact that we might have like less neuromuscular efficiency. So we might actually not even be able to achieve what our true 1 rep max could actually be because we're less efficient there at that high end ranges, right? Kind of thing. Or we are more capable of just doing more and handling more volume. There's little nuances there, but it's not, but that like the solution isn't, well, we shouldn't train women in strength training ranges. It's like, no, we should still continue to train them in strength training ranges. Like that still works. I mean, we have data that shows women and men gain muscle and strength very similarly. I think that one review basically showed that it's the same except for like upper body, but the differences are thought to be potentially because women are just coming more detrained into training. So there's more potential there from that upper body standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
We can't ignore the social things that are impacting training. Women are coming into training with a lot different of a social upbringing and environment than men, unless they were athletes, which some are and were. I was, but some people, they don't even touch these things until they're 30, 40, 50. You know what I mean? So there's a lot different, we're bringing a lot of different social or personal experiences to training with women that I think are probably more important than some of the physiological differences that we really like to overblow, is like comfort level and confidence and moving patterns. And I think, like anecdotally, I will say I think women are more afraid of being injured or getting hurt than men, and that leads them to more apprehension. Like, I think that's probably a bigger limiter than like some of that other stuff is like, okay, well, they're afraid to even lift heavy loads to begin with or lift heavy enough. So like that's going to be more of a rate limiter than your neuromuscular efficiency at the top of your 1 rep max. Exclusively, we're talking a gen pop, right?
What about the incidence of hypermobility, joint laxity?
Well, guess what? You're talking to the hypermobile queen. So I was diagnosed with hypermobility in high school. I have like extreme hypermobility disorder. That, that I definitely say, like, I always refer to like physical therapists that are good physical therapists, like ones that actually understand sport, have saved me time and time again, because I was basically told growing up, like, quit sports, wear a back brace. You can't ever walk or run. Like, you should just stop running. You aren't made for ultras, all these things. So, with that, I would say for me personally, strength training has saved my life. It has made everything better for me. There is some reports of like for females, there is changes in like laxity across the menstrual cycle, and that might result on like increased rates of ACL tears and things like that. That's thought to be brought on from the menstrual cycle around ovulation, or like we can consider those things. But I think for most regular people, the issue would be more of a lack of strength, so to speak. We're not, you know what I mean? Like, you're probably not doing lateral cone cutting drill depth drop type things. Like, you're just probably, working with your body. Auto regulation covers for a lot of that. But I mean, hypermobility from a standpoint of that's something that trust me, I deal with every nag and niggle and injury and setback and hiccup from that across time. So I get it. But for me, I think good strength training that's well programmed and recoverable has been the thing that has made that way better for me. And same for, any female who's dealing with any sort of laxity within those things. Like, that's the recommendation I'm going to give, but specifically getting stronger in your in ranges, not just doing mobility, but like getting stronger in your in ranges. And kind of, I know some people don't like the word stability or stabilizing, but being able to like control your in ranges and having the strength within those would be what I think is the most important thing, rather than just doing more stretching, doing more mobility, or just lifting. Is like, okay, but your issue is going to be more like, for me, at the bottom of my squat, my hips will just relax fully. Like, I can just sit down there with 200 pounds on my back. Like, it's nothing. But for me, I had to like retrain that at one point in time in my lifting career of like, how do I maintain that tension and stop and then come back up and actually remain stronger at that end of my in range. And I've had to do that with my shoulders and things like that too. So yeah, thinking about strength at in range, not just being stretchier.
I love that. Like 100% agree. Real quick. The old leg press, the fear of locking out knees on a leg press thing, I think is generally unfounded for most people. With someone with hypermobility, very, very careful, because leg press stands out because number one is you can like disproportionately load it really heavily. So you can put someone in a vulnerable position. So I tend to go to a soft lockout for someone who has hypermobility, but I don't want to create fear. But it's like, hey, we want to make sure we're in control of this, use appropriate load management, which has come up a bunch of times. And then you alluded to this. Self-selection. What do people who are good at things do? Gravitate to things they're good at. If someone is bendy and super flexy, where do they like to go? Yoga. Guys like me, we don't generally like yoga because we're not bendy and flexy. So guy like me could probably benefit from more yoga. And the woman who, and again, on average, I think this is more prone for women, but the woman who like loves her yoga but isn't doing any strength training, who's hypermobile, go do some strength training.
I really cannot tell you, Andrew. I mean, strength training saved my life. I was in so much pain. I don't think people realize how much acute pain I have from having hypermobility. I don't talk about it a lot. I should talk about it more. I stopped identifying with that as being my limiter and my diagnosis. So like, I just don't think to talk about it all the time, because for me, it was like, I just said no to all those no's that I was given. But strength training was the single-handedly the best thing I ever did. I really can't state that for a lot. I know this isn't a podcast about hypermobility and all that stuff, but like, that is, that has been my pain management hack for so many things for me. Just getting stronger, really. Like, that's what really got me into strength training with sports. But then I was in a lot of pain as an athlete, and I was told, don't do this, don't do this. And I was like, no, I'm going to get strong. And guess what? I got strong and it worked.
I like that. If there is a biohack, it is strength training, right? Like, almost forget drinking pee and butter coffee and what have you, shots at a certain character. Go strength training. This has been an absolute masterclass. There are a bunch of questions that I didn't even get into because the depth of the things that we did were so good, but I also think so accessible and practical. So everybody listening, you can see why I have been such a fan of Alyssa's work, where I wanted to connect you with other people who I thought would be, you guys doing similar things to continue to platform share your ideas with the world. So how do people find you and dive into more of your resources?
Yeah. Sorry. Hey, Kona, come here. My dog's about to go bark. Someone outside the door. So you can follow me. I hang out the most on Instagram at Doc Liss Fitness, like DOC, Dr. Liss, LYSS Fitness. I also have been on YouTube a lot more over the last year or so. I've got a lot of really good resources there actually for people. If you're looking to learn more about really anything I talked about here, just hop on my YouTube and you can find like more masterclasses and all that. I also have my own podcast called the Messy Middle Podcast, but if you just go to doclissfitness.com, you'll find all of that. And then I have my training programs, the Liss Method. Again, if you go to any of my Instagrams or website, you'll find that all linked from there, where we do lifting, running, hybrid, cardio training, all of kind of this whole systematic thing I could spiel about there. So kind of two places you can find me, but otherwise doclissfitness.com, and you can find links to YouTube, podcast, Instagram, training programs, more places to learn and all that.
Awesome. So for everybody listening, again, this is one of the earliest episodes of a new approach to the podcast. For many years, I have had, like, God, 7 years talking to coaches, and really the conversation we're geared towards, helping coaches. That was fun. That was very beneficial to me over the years, but I really want to get this podcast in the hands of more of the end user, the general population person, the person we're trying to get into this stuff, that huge cohort of people that isn't even part of our world yet. Forget fighting over like minor interpretations of research. I actually want to get more people into gyms, more people running, feeling safe running, not worried about like, running is going to get me hurt. We've talked about how to navigate that. Share this with someone in your world that would really benefit from it. And for the coaches listening, I know you guys are going to get more out of these conversations anyway, because this stuff is still going to help us help our clients. So Alyssa, thank you. You're absolutely wonderful. I appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.